Hello, you perfectly lovely little people. My name is Sarah and I'm going to read you a chapter from Peter Pan and Wendy by JM Barrie. This evening's story is called The Redskins and the Pirates. The Redskins now became the children's best friends, especially Tiger Lily, who could not forget how Peter had saved her from the hands of Smee and Starkey. She said, "Peter Pan saved me. He is my very best friend. I'll not let the pirates hurt him." She and her braves sat up all night, every night, keeping guard above the underground house. And the Redskins also took to kneeling at Peter's feet and calling him the Great White Father. This was very pleasant for Peter, and he gave himself fine airs all over it. But the Redskins were nothing like so polite to the other boys. They just said, "How do?" or something like that. Perhaps they thought Peter had done all the fighting in the lagoon by himself, but we know how the boys had helped. One evening, the Redskins were on guard above and the children were having tea below. It was a make-believe tea, which was never so interesting as the real one, and there was a good deal of quarrelling going on. They kept telling tales to each other to Wendy. It was all one string of complaints. "Slightly's coughing on the table. Nibs is speaking with his mouth full. Curly is trying to eat rolls and yams at once. I complain of the twins," and so on and so on. It was as well that Peter came in just then with some real nuts for the boys and the right crocodile time for Wendy. She was particular about the time when it was getting towards bedtime, and the clock inside the crocodile was the only one on the island. The boys wanted some exercise after their large make-believe tea, and Wendy, as she sat mending a pile of stockings, said they could do a song and dance with their nightgowns on. So they had a really wonderful dance with a pillow fight mixed up with it. They tumbled over each other all around the room and pretended to be afraid of their own shadows. They banged each other with the pillows as they sang and shouted, and it was the jolliest evening ever known in the house under the ground. At last, very tired and happy, they got into bed and asked Wendy to tell them their favourite story. The story Peter hated, the one about Mrs. Darling. This time, Peter did not stop his ears or leave the room as usual. He stayed where he was upon the mushroom stool. Wendy began. "There was once a gentleman." "I'd have rather he had been a lady," said Curly. "Be quiet," said Wendy. "There was a lady too." "She isn't dead, is she?" said the twins. "Oh, no." "I'm awfully glad she isn't dead," said Tootles. "Oh, dear," sighed Wendy. "Do let me get on." "Less noise there," cried Peter. "The gentleman's name was Mr. Darling," Wendy continued, "and the lady's name was Mrs. Darling." "I knew them," said John proudly. "I think I knew them," said Michael, but he was really not sure. "They had 3 children," said Wendy, "and these children had a nurse called Nana. But Mr. Darling was angry with Nana, and he chained her up in the backyard. So all the children flew away." "That's an awfully good story," said Nibs. "They flew away," continued Wendy, "to the Neverland. But they knew that their mother would always leave the window open for the children to fly back into the nursery. So they stayed away, for years, and had the most delightful time. Then they went home and lived happily ever after." Here there was a deep groan from Peter, which made Wendy afraid he must be ill. She put a kind hand on his wrist and asked him whereabouts the pain was. "Not that kind of pain," he told her. "It's because you are quite wrong about mothers. They're not like that. They don't leave the windows open. I know, for I flew away from home and stayed away for a long, long time. I made sure I could always get in again. I never told you before, but when I did fly back, the window was barred. My mother had forgotten me, and there was another little boy in my bed." This might have not been quite true, but Peter believed it, and so did all the rest. John and Michael were so alarmed at the thought of being shut out that they cried to Wendy, "Let us go home at once," and clung round her. "But not tonight," exclaimed the lost boys. "Yes, tonight, at once," said Wendy firmly. "Peter, will you please arrange for us to go home?" "If you wish," replied Peter carelessly. And he went up tree and ordered the Redskins to take the 3 children to the coast. Tinker Bell was to guide them over the sea. This really pleased Tink no end. But at first she refused, and Peter had to be very stern with her. The Lost Boys were so distressed at their mother Wendy going away that they talked of chaining her up and keeping her prisoner. But they took care not to say this before Peter. After all, she was Peter's visitor. You can't chain up somebody else's visitor. Peter, however, did not seem to mind losing Wendy. He didn't even say, "Must you go so soon?" or "Oh, do stay a little longer." He made believe that he didn't care, and he pretended so as well, that Wendy fancied that he was, on the whole, rather glad to get rid of her, which was very sad after their beautiful times together. John and Michael were ready dressed for their journey when Wendy suddenly thought how nice it would be to invite the Lost Boys to come home with her and be adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Darling. When she told this to the boys, they jumped for joy. "Peter, can we go?" they cried eagerly. "Right," said Peter. They began to look for sticks and to pack up bundles. But when Wendy told Peter to get his things, he skipped about the room playing on his pipe saying, "I'm not coming with you." He meant to stay always a little boy and have fun in the Neverland. "If you find your mothers," he said to the Lost Boys, "I hope you will like them." They remembered that Peter did not think much of mothers. Wendy hoped, though, to the very last minute that Peter would change his mind. She put his medicine ready for him, carefully counting the drops. It's only water, but you can't be too particular with medicine. And she made him promise to change his clothes if he got wet. And still she hoped he would say something nice. But he shook hands with her cheerfully and shouted to Tinker Bell to lead the way. "Now then, no fuss," he cried to the boys. "Bye, Wendy." She answered in a choky voice, "Bye, Peter." But she never finished his name, for the most fearful, frightful, fierce and furious noise broke out above their heads. The pirates had attacked the Redskins. The air was full of deafening screeches, yells, war cries, bangs and muskets, clashes of steel and the sound of heavy tramping feet rushing to and fro, making the ground shake. Everyone down below was shaking too, except Peter. Everybody's face was pale. Everybody's mouth was open. Everybody's feet were stone cold, except Peter's. Peter was feeling as brave as anything. He took his sword in his hand, and his eyes grew very bright and sparkling. Do hope you've all cleaned your teeth and washed your hands. Now I want you to go to bed and snuggle in and give yourself a great big cuddle. Night, night, you gorgeous people. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.